Beloved, listen to me carefully. There are moments in your life when God pulls back the veil and shows you something that shakes you to the very core of your spirit. There are moments in a person's life when God decides to reveal something so profound, so unexpected, that it leaves the heart trembling and the soul silent. It is in those moments of revelation that heaven seems to open, and the still, small voice of the Lord begins to speak, not through thunder or fire, but through a quiet conviction that grips the spirit. I remember such a moment when I cried out in prayer, Lord, where are the voices that will stand for truth in this generation? Where are the hearts that will not bow before fear or the opinions of men? And as I waited in that stillness, God began to show me something extraordinary. I saw a vision, a man standing alone in the middle of a storm. The winds were wild, howling with anger and confusion. The sea around him was dark and restless. Everywhere I looked, there were waves of doubt and voices of compromise shouting, "Sit down, be quiet, don't speak what is unpopular." The world had built an altar to fear and called it wisdom, and yet in the center of that chaos, this man stood unmoved. He did not raise his voice in anger. He did not shrink back in fear. He simply stood calm, steady, unshaken. The light that surrounded him was not his own. It came from above, and the longer I watched, the stronger it grew. Then the Lord said, "This is what I am doing in this generation. I am raising voices that will not tremble before power. I am raising hearts that will not bow to the idols of this age. These will be men and women of truth, unafraid to speak what I place in their mouths." And I realized this was not about one man or one name. It was a symbol of what God desires to do through many. It was a glimpse of a movement being born, a wave of courage beginning to rise where fear once ruled. God showed me that in a time when truth is twisted, He is calling His people to stand straight. In a world where compromise is celebrated, He is calling for conviction. In an age where silence is safer, He is calling for a holy boldness that speaks with love but refuses to bend. And the Lord said, "Those who will seek my face in humility will carry my power in boldness. Those who will stand for me in the small things will be given strength to stand in the great." My friend, you must understand this is not the hour for quiet faith. This is not the time to hide the light God has placed within you. The world does not need more comfort. It needs clarity. The world does not need more agreement. It needs anointed truth. God is not looking for perfect people. He is looking for willing hearts, hearts that say, "Lord, I will go, I will speak, I will not be silent." When God gives revelation, it is never meant to remain private. What He shows to one is meant to awaken many. The courage He births in one heart is meant to ignite a fire in countless others. You may think you are small, but in the hands of God, your obedience can shake nations. When you dare to stand for what is right, even when you stand alone, heaven stands with you. So rise up. The hour is late, but the light is breaking. The Spirit of the Lord is stirring hearts again, calling a generation not to comfort but to conviction, not to safety but to strength. The truth will not be silenced, and those who carry it will not be forgotten. What God is doing now is bigger than any name, any face, or any platform. It is divine. And when it is revealed in full, it will leave the world speechless. When God showed me that man standing in the storm, I could feel the weight of the wind and the roar of the waves. It was more than just an image. It was a message to the heart. The world around him was chaos. The air was thick with confusion, anger, and deception. It was as if every voice shouted at once, demanding that he bend, that he conform, that he let go of what he believed. Yet he stood not because he was strong in himself, but because something greater was holding him up. I could sense it. It was the Spirit of God anchoring him in the middle of the tempest. He was not driven by pride or rebellion. He was held by conviction. The light that surrounded him grew brighter as the darkness around him deepened, and I realized that his stillness was not weakness. It was power under divine control. The winds of our age are not natural. They are spiritual. They come to test what we truly believe. They come to expose what is built on sand and what is built on the rock. The man in the vision was not standing for attention. He was standing because he could not do otherwise. There was a fire in his bones that would not let him sit down. God had lit a flame in his heart that the world could not extinguish. And as I watched, I understood this was a message for all of us. We are living in a time when storms are rising everywhere. Storms of culture, storms of ideology, storms of fear. People are losing their sense of direction because the compass of truth has been buried under noise and confusion. The line between right and wrong has been blurred by clever words and popular trends. But even in the midst of this confusion, God is calling his people to stand like that man, to stand firm, to stand in truth, and to stand in love. Standing does not mean shouting louder than everyone else. It means refusing to bow when the world demands your surrender. It means holding on to your faith when everything around you says, let go. It means trusting that God's word is still true even when the world laughs at it. There is power in quiet conviction, there is strength in peaceful resistance, and there is victory in unshakable faith. The man in the storm was not isolated by accident, he was positioned there by divine purpose. Sometimes God will place you in the middle of a storm not to destroy you, but to display his strength through you. The darker the night, the brighter the light shines. The heavier the wind, the deeper your roots grow. Every storm you endure in obedience becomes a testimony of God's sustaining power. And then the Lord spoke to my heart again. He said, this image you see is a reflection of what I will raise up across the earth. I will awaken men and women who will stand, not for recognition, but for righteousness. I will raise voices that will speak truth with humility, authority, and grace. These are not the days of retreat. These are the days of revelation. I knew at that moment that what I saw was not a single act of courage. It was a prophetic sign. It was a glimpse of what is to come when the Spirit of God breathes upon his people again. The same light that held that man steady will fill every believer who refuses to bow to fear. The same fire that kept him strong will burn in those who choose to live by faith, not by sight. The storm will come, but it will not prevail. The wind will roar, but it will not destroy what God has established. Those who stand on his word will stand forever. The message was clear. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of faith in the face of it. And when the world sees that kind of faith, when it witnesses that unshakable calm in the middle of the chaos, it will be left speechless, not because of the man, but because of the God who sustains him. When I heard the Lord say, I am raising voices that will not tremble before power, something inside me broke. It was as if a divine burden rested on my heart. I began to see that God was not only speaking of one individual, but of a new breed of people he is preparing. Men and women with hearts purified by fire, minds anchored in truth, and spirits unafraid to walk alone if necessary. These are not the loud, boastful voices of the world. They are humble servants who have been hidden in the secret place, waiting for God's appointed time. They have faced rejection, misunderstanding, and isolation, but through every trial, the Lord has been shaping their spirit, teaching them endurance, and clothing them with spiritual authority. God said, I am raising voices that will not bow to the idols of this age. These idols are not made of stone or wood anymore. They are built from fame, acceptance, and fear of man. Many have traded conviction for comfort and purity for popularity. Yet God is calling out from heaven, who will stand for me, who will speak what I say, even when the world despises it. And in every nation hearts are responding, "Here am I, Lord, send me." I could sense in my spirit that this calling was not about position or title, it was about surrender. God is not looking for polished speakers or perfect performers. He is searching for those who will yield completely to His will. The Lord said, "I will put my word in their mouths, and it will burn like fire." Their words will pierce the darkness, not because of eloquence, but because they carry my presence. These voices will not speak to please crowds, they will speak to awaken hearts. In this vision, I saw multitudes rising. Some were young, filled with fresh zeal and holy boldness. Others were seasoned warriors, scarred but unbroken, who had learned the cost of obedience. Together, they formed a chorus of truth that echoed across nations. They were not united by denomination or background, but by purpose. Their language was faith, their banner was truth, their mission was revival. And then I understood these voices are not meant to fight against flesh and blood. They are sent to confront the lies that hold people captive. They will not come with violence or pride, but with clarity, compassion, and courage. They will expose darkness by shining light, not by cursing it. They will walk into places of confusion and bring divine order through the spirit of wisdom. The Lord said, "The spirit of courage will come upon those who seek my face, not for fame, not for power, but for the sake of my kingdom." I realized that courage is not born in comfort. It is forged in prayer. It grows in the silence of waiting, in the loneliness of obedience, in the hidden hours when no one sees but God. The people He is raising now are those who have been through the furnace of testing. They have wept in secret, wrestled with doubt, and yet still chosen to trust Him. And now He is calling them forth not to impress the world, but to impact eternity. I could hear the Spirit saying, "Do not despise small beginnings, for the whisper you speak in faith today will become a trumpet of truth tomorrow." Every act of obedience matters. Every time you stand for righteousness, even when no one applauds, heaven takes notice. God will amplify the sound of your faith until it becomes a wave that sweeps across generations. The vision was clear. This is a time of divine awakening. The Lord is breathing courage into ordinary people, students, parents, workers, pastors, artists, those who will dare to carry His truth without compromise. They will face opposition, but they will not be moved. They will be misunderstood, but they will not be silenced. For the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead is alive in them. And when the world sees their unshakable conviction, when it witnesses their love in the face of hatred, their faith in the face of fear, their endurance in the face of pressure, it will be left speechless, because what God is about to do through these voices will not be the work of man, but the unmistakable work of God. We live in an hour where truth has become a rare treasure. The world is loud, overflowing with opinions, yet starving for real conviction. It celebrates what is temporary and mocks what is eternal. People are applauded for saying what pleases the crowd, but those who dare to speak the truth are often cast aside, misunderstood, or ridiculed. Yet even in this confusion, God has not fallen silent. His Spirit is moving quietly through the noise, searching for hearts that will not compromise. He is not looking for perfect men or flawless women. He is looking for those who will dare to believe Him, even when everything around them crumbles. In prayer, I could feel the ache of God's heart for this generation. He longs for His people to walk in truth, not a truth shaped by culture, but a truth anchored in His Word. The voices of the world are many, but only one voice brings peace. Only one voice carries eternal power. And the Lord said, I am raising a people who will not only speak truth but live it. They will be light in the darkness and love in the midst of hatred. These people will not seek the approval of men, for they have already been approved by God. Their strength will not come from applause, but from the quiet assurance that they are walking in divine purpose. I saw in my spirit a line being drawn, not a line of division for destruction, but a line of distinction for destiny. On one side stood those who bend easily with the changing winds of culture, and on the other stood those who planted their feet firmly on the rock of ages. The ones who stood did not appear strong at first. Many were simple, unnoticed, and humble. But as the storm raged, their stability became evident. While others swayed and stumbled, they remained steady, and the light of God began to shine from within them. The world today says, be tolerant of everything, believe nothing absolutely. But truth cannot be redefined by human will. It does not shift with trends or change with time. Truth is eternal because it comes from the Eternal One. And those who carry it must be willing to endure misunderstanding, rejection, and isolation. But hear this, those who stand for truth never stand alone. Heaven stands beside them, the angels of the Lord encamp around them. The Spirit within them gives them words and wisdom that no opposition can silence. The Lord whispered again, tell my people, this is not the time to hide. This is the time to shine. It is easy to speak faith when the crowd agrees, but true faith is proven when you stand alone. When God places His truth in your heart, it becomes a sacred fire. You cannot bury it, you cannot silence it, and you cannot ignore it. If you try, it will burn within you until it finds a voice. That is what God is doing now, igniting fires in the hearts of ordinary people who will refuse to let fear put them out. This is not the hour for lukewarm believers. This is not the moment for half-hearted faith. The time has come for holy boldness to rise again in the church, for conviction to replace compromise, for passion to replace passivity. God is calling His children to take their place, not as spectators of the world's chaos, but as carriers of heaven's truth. And though the cost may be high, the reward will be glorious, because when you stand for truth, you become a vessel of transformation. You become a beacon to those lost in the fog of confusion. You become proof that God still reigns, that light still overcomes darkness, and that love still conquers hate. The world may call it foolishness, but heaven calls it faith. And those who walk in this truth unshaken, unashamed, and unafraid will not only see revival, they will become revival. The noise of the world will fade, but the voice of truth will echo forever, leaving every heart that encounters it utterly speechless. When God revealed this message to me, I understood that vision was not a warning of despair, but a call to awakening. I saw in my spirit a generation that had been sleeping, a people distracted by the glitter of the world, numbed by entertainment, and lulled into silence by fear. Yet beneath the surface, something was stirring. The Spirit of God was moving, quietly but powerfully, like the first breath of dawn breaking through a long, dark night. I could feel the heartbeat of heaven calling, "Wake up, my people. The time of silence is over. The time of slumber has ended. I am breathing life into dry bones again." This awakening was not about rebellion against the world, but about realignment with heaven. God was not looking for angry voices, He was seeking burning hearts. I saw young and old alike turning away from distraction and bending their knees in prayer. They were tired of shallow living. They were hungry for something real, something pure. I saw tears falling as hearts repented, not from guilt alone, but from revelation. a deep understanding of how far the world had drifted from truth, and how desperately we need God to return to the center. And the Lord whispered, "These are the ones I will fill with my Spirit. These are the ones who will carry my voice." In the vision, I saw this generation standing in the gap between chaos and clarity. They were not many, but they were mighty because the hand of God was upon them. They were not chosen for their strength, but for their surrender. They were not trained in the ways of men, but in the secret place of prayer. When they spoke, it was not with arrogance or anger, but with a holy authority that came from intimacy with God. Their words carried weight because they carried His presence. I saw cities awakening as these voices rose, not through riots or noise, but through truth spoken in love, through compassion lived out with conviction. Homes were restored, hearts were healed, churches once divided were united again under the banner of truth. And then I heard the Spirit say, "This is the movement I am birthing, not built by human hands, but by the fire of my Spirit." Beloved, this is the time of revival, not the revival of stadiums filled with applause, but the revival of hearts filled with surrender. The Lord is not impressed with noise. He is moved by obedience. The next great move of God will not begin on stages. It will begin in secret places. It will begin when mothers pray over their children, when fathers lead their homes with integrity, when young people choose purity over popularity, when leaders humble themselves and seek the face of God once more. Revival is not coming. It has already begun in the hearts that dare to say yes to His call. God is searching for those who will be His messengers, His watchmen, His witnesses. The enemy tries to convince us that our voices don't matter, that our prayers are too small, that our obedience is insignificant. But one whisper of truth, spoken in faith, can break chains. One act of obedience can shift generations. One surrendered heart can change the atmosphere of a city. The Lord said, "I am multiplying the courage of one into the strength of many. The fire that burns in one will ignite thousands." And I realized that the revelation God gave was not just a glimpse of the future. It was an invitation. It was a divine summons to every believer: rise up, stand firm, burn bright. The world is desperate for authenticity, for people who do not just talk about God, but walk with Him. This is the hour for such people to arise. The earth is groaning, nations are trembling, but heaven is ready to move through those who are willing to believe again. So lift your eyes, for the dawn is breaking. The shaking you see around you is not the end. It is the beginning of a divine awakening. The fire of God is being poured out on those who will stand without fear, love without compromise, and serve without hesitation. And when this fire spreads, when this truth burns through every barrier and every lie, the world will have no words left, because what God is about to do through His people will truly leave all who see it speechless. When God began to show me the vision of young men and women rising from every nation, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was not a gathering of the powerful or the famous. It was a movement of the humble, the faithful, and the hungry. I saw ordinary people, students, workers, mothers, fathers, even children whose hearts were burning with a fire that the world could not give and could never take away. Their faces were shining not with pride, but with the glow of purpose. They carried a quiet strength that did not come from confidence in themselves, but from complete dependence on God. I could feel the atmosphere of heaven in that vision. These people were not waiting for permission to speak. They were moved by divine urgency. Some stood in classrooms, others in offices, some on the streets, others in places of worship. Wherever they were, they carried light into darkness. The words they spoke were not always many, but they carried power. Every sentence was wrapped in conviction. Every action reflected the love of God. And the Lord said, "This is what I am doing in the earth. I am awakening voices that will carry my message, not as echoes of others, but as instruments of my spirit." The vision grew clearer. I saw that these rising ones came from every background, every color, every nation. The world might have overlooked them, but heaven had marked them. Some had come out of brokenness, yet their wounds had become wells of compassion. Some had walked through betrayal and pain, yet those scars had turned into symbols of grace. The fire within them was not born from comfort but from struggle. They had known rejection, yet it only pushed them closer to God. They had been through the valley, but they came out carrying oil, the oil of endurance, the oil of purity, the oil of anointing. Then I heard the Spirit say, "They will not stand in the strength of numbers, but in the power of unity. Their voices will blend into one sound, a sound that shakes the heavens and pierces darkness." And I saw them lifting their hands in worship, crying out with one heart, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." The sound was not chaotic, it was holy. It was not filled with pride, it was filled with surrender. And as their praise rose, the darkness around them began to retreat. I realized that this was the fulfillment of a promise, that in the last days God would pour out His Spirit upon all flesh. Sons and daughters would prophesy. Young men would see visions. Old men would dream dreams. The fire of revival would not be confined to churches or pulpits. It would spread into homes, schools, cities, and nations. It would flow through art, through music, through technology, through acts of love and compassion. Every sphere of life would become a stage for the glory of God. The Lord said, "What you see in one, I will multiply in many." One person's obedience will inspire another's courage. One act of faith will spark another's boldness. Like embers carried by the wind, this fire will not stay contained. It will spread quietly at first, but soon it will blaze openly. The systems of the world will try to silence it, but they will fail, because what is born of the Spirit cannot be suppressed by man. And I felt a deep stirring in my soul. This was not a message for the future. It was a prophecy for now. The time of watching others rise is over. God is calling every believer to be part of this awakening. You do not need to be famous to be faithful. You do not need a stage to carry power. You only need a willing heart and a surrendered life. The fire that God is releasing will not just be seen in grand events, but in quiet obedience, in every prayer whispered in faith, every act of kindness done in love, every truth spoken in courage. This is the generation of fire carriers, truth bearers, and kingdom builders. And when they rise, the world will witness something that no force of darkness can explain or extinguish. The light will shine in the deepest night, and the people who see it will fall silent in awe. For what God is doing through this generation will indeed leave the earth speechless. When I heard the words, "What you see in one, I will multiply in many," they echoed in my heart like thunder from heaven. I understood that God was showing me the power of multiplication in His kingdom, not the kind that adds numbers, but the kind that transforms hearts. I saw in the Spirit that one spark of obedience can ignite a forest of revival. One heart fully surrendered to God can awaken thousands. What begins as a whisper of faith in one person can become a roar of truth across nations. And God said, "Do not underestimate what I can do with one willing vessel, for the fire I place in one life will spread like the wind of my Spirit until it becomes an unquenchable flame." In that moment I saw again the man standing in the storm, but now he was not alone. Around him began to appear others, men, women, and children from every corner of the earth. Each of them carried a flame, and as their lights began to shine together, The darkness that once seemed overwhelming began to break apart. Their unity was not organized by men. It was orchestrated by the Spirit. It was not built on human agreement, but on divine alignment. Each one carried the same fire, yet each burned uniquely according to their calling. I realized then that God never intended his work to stop with one voice. Every revelation, every testimony, every act of faith is a seed planted to bear fruit in others. What God births in one person's heart is meant to awaken something in another. That is why you must never hide the light he has given you, because your obedience may be the key that unlocks someone else's destiny. The courage you show in standing for truth today might inspire someone tomorrow to stand for righteousness in a faraway place you may never visit. This is how heaven works, through divine multiplication. God does not multiply through pride or ambition. He multiplies through surrender. He takes the broken bread and the yielded heart and makes it enough to feed multitudes. He takes the voice that says, "Yes, Lord," and turns it into a movement that no power of darkness can silence. That is why the enemy tries to make you doubt your significance, because he fears the chain reaction your faith can cause. He knows that if one person truly catches fire, the whole world can change. The Lord said, "I will take the faith of the few and make it the strength of the many." And I saw families restored, communities transformed, nations touched, not through programs or politics, but through the power of the Spirit flowing from heart to heart. Like rivers merging into one great current, the lives of these believers began to flow together in purpose. They were diverse in appearance, culture, and language, but they all carried one message: Jesus is Lord, and his truth cannot be silenced. This multiplication was not noisy or boastful. It was quiet, like leaven working through dough, like seeds sprouting in the hidden soil. But soon its effects became impossible to ignore. Hope began to rise where despair had ruled. Love began to heal where hatred had divided. The fire that started in one heart became a movement of mercy, courage, and conviction that swept through the nations. And then I heard the Spirit say again, "The revelation I give to one is meant to awaken thousands. The courage I plant in one heart can set a generation ablaze." I felt tears in my eyes as I realized that this was not a distant promise. It is a present calling. Every believer is part of this divine chain of light. Each act of obedience, each prayer of faith, each moment of surrender adds to the great flame of God's work on earth. So do not despise the small things you do for God. Do not measure your worth by the world's applause. Heaven counts differently. Heaven measures the ripples of eternity created by your faithfulness. If you will simply believe, obey, and keep your fire burning, God will multiply your life beyond what you can imagine. The Lord is gathering a generation not defined by fame but by faith, not by influence but by intimacy with Him. They will walk in unity, power, and humility. They will not chase platforms, they will carry presence. And when this fire spreads, when the courage of one becomes the conviction of many, the world will be left in awe. For what begins as a single flame in one heart will soon blaze as the glory of God across the nations, leaving every eye that sees it speechless. The revelation God gave me that night was not meant to fill me with pride but with trembling. When He said, "You are not called to watch history, you are called to shape it," I felt the weight of those words settle deeply in my spirit. It was not a call reserved for prophets or preachers alone. It was a divine invitation extended to every believer who dares to walk with God in obedience. We were never created merely to survive the times, we were created to transform them. Each generation is given an opportunity to carry the light of God into its darkest hours, and this generation is no exception. I saw in my vision that many people were standing on the sidelines of destiny, watching the storms of the world unfold, waiting for someone else to rise. But the Lord said, I have not called you to be spectators. I have called you to be participants in my divine plan. Too many have believed the lie that their voice does not matter, that their prayers are too small, that their obedience is insignificant. But heaven does not measure greatness the way the world does. In the kingdom of God, significance is not found in status but in surrender. One obedient heart is more powerful than an entire army of indifferent souls. When God calls you to shape history, He does not start by giving you a platform. He begins by giving you a burden. He places something holy in your heart, something that will not let you rest until you act. That burden might be for your family, your nation, your community, or your generation. It might be a vision for revival, a calling to speak truth, a mission to show love where hatred has ruled. Whatever it is not random. It is divine strategy. God entrusts pieces of His plan to those who are willing to carry them in prayer, in faith, and in action. I saw in my spirit that every believer who dares to say, Yes, Lord, becomes a living tool in His hands. Heaven begins to move through them. Circumstances bend to divine will. Entire atmospheres shift when even one child of God stands in faith. The shaping of history begins not in the halls of power, but in the quiet corners of surrender when someone chooses to forgive, when someone dares to speak truth, when someone refuses to bow to fear. These small unseen acts become eternal milestones in God's grand story. The Lord said, Those who walk with me will not just live through history, they will rewrite it with their faith. I saw people praying over their nations with tears streaming down their faces. I saw young people laying down their pride to seek purity. I saw families choosing unity over bitterness. I saw pastors humbling themselves to serve rather than be served. Each act, though small, carried a ripple of power that reached far beyond their sight. Like drops of rain joining to form a river, their obedience began to shape the course of nations. Then God said something that burned into my heart. History is not written by those who speak the loudest, but by those who listen the closest to my voice. In that moment, I understood that to shape history is not to force our will upon the world, but to align our hearts with God's. True influence flows from intimacy with Him. The closer you walk with God, the more your life begins to reflect His authority. When you carry His presence, even your silence speaks, even your footsteps shift atmospheres. You are not too small to matter. You are not too late to make a difference. The same Spirit that moved through Moses, through Esther, through Elijah, through Paul, is alive within you. You carry the power to shift the destiny of generations because you carry the presence of the One who holds eternity. Every prayer you whisper in faith is recorded in heaven. Every act of obedience is a seed planted in eternity. So do not stand by and watch the world unravel. Rise up and take your place in God's unfolding story. Let your life become a vessel through which His will is done on earth as it is in heaven. You were born for this time, chosen for this moment, appointed to shape history with your faith. And when all is said and done, when heaven's record of this generation is read, may it be said that we did not shrink back in fear, but stood in faith. For when God moves through His people, even the course of history must bow before Him, and the world will once again be left speechless. The revelation that the courage God plants in one heart can set a generation ablaze is one of the most powerful truths I have ever encountered. When I first heard those words in my spirit, they struck me with divine weight. I began to see that history has always turned on the hinge of one courageous soul, someone who chose faith over fear, obedience over comfort, and conviction over compromise. Courage is not something born out of confidence in ourselves. It is birthed in the secret place, when a person looks at the impossible and still says, "Nevertheless, I will trust the Lord." It is the invisible fire that transforms ordinary people into instruments of divine change. As I prayed, the Lord showed me that courage is contagious. It spreads not through words alone, but through example. When one person dares to stand in truth, it awakens something in others who have been silent for too long. Courage begets courage, and one spark becomes a wildfire. This is how revivals are born, how nations are changed, how darkness is pushed back. Not by the majority, but by the few who refuse to bow. The courage God places in one person's heart is meant to ignite others until an entire generation rises with holy boldness. In the vision, I saw a single flame burning in the darkness. It was small, fragile, and surrounded by shadows. But then, one by one, other flames began to appear. Each light came from someone who saw the first flame and said within themselves, "If they can stand, I can too." Soon, what had begun as a flicker became a sea of fire that covered the land. The darkness did not disappear immediately. It trembled, it fought, but the light kept spreading until there was nowhere left for the shadows to hide. That, the Lord said, is how I move through the courageous. Courage is not loud or reckless. It is steady and unshakable. It does not boast, it believes. It does not draw strength from applause, but from the quiet assurance that God is faithful. True courage is born in prayer, refined in trials, and proven in obedience. It grows when fear whispers, "You can't," and faith answers, "God can." It's what made Noah build the ark when there was no rain. It's what made Moses stand before Pharaoh with nothing but a staff and a promise. It's what made Esther step before the king, risking her life for her people. It's what made the disciples preach even when imprisoned and beaten. The same spirit that emboldened them is alive in you today. The Lord said, "I am releasing the spirit of courage upon my people again." I saw hearts that had grown cold suddenly catch fire. I saw believers who had been silent begin to speak truth again. I saw young men and women stand in classrooms, boardrooms, and streets, unashamed of their faith. Their courage did not make them arrogant. It made them humble yet unmovable. They loved deeply, forgave quickly, and stood firmly. And as they did, others began to rise. One voice became two, two became 10, and soon the world began to take notice. The enemy fears courage because it exposes his greatest weakness. He has no power over those who will not be afraid. When you refuse to bow to fear, you break his hold not only over your life, but over those watching you. That is why your courage matters. Someone else's faith depends on your stand. Someone's breakthrough is waiting for your obedience. When you stand in the fire and remain faithful, you prove to others that it can be done, and they begin to rise too. The courage that God plants in you is not just for you. It is an inheritance for generations to come. It is the spark that will light torches in the hearts of your children, your friends, your community, your nation. So do not hide your flame. Do not let fear silence your voice. The world may grow darker, but that only makes the light shine brighter. Be the one who stands. Be the one who believes. Be the one who burns for truth when others bow to lies. Because when one person dares to trust God completely, it does not end with them. Heaven multiplies that courage until it becomes a movement. And when that movement spreads, when faith becomes louder than fear, when light outshines darkness, when love overcomes hate, the world will stand still in awe. What began in one heart will echo through 1,000 more, and the sound of that courage will leave every generation after you speechless. When God spoke the words, those who remain faithful in Shaking will be entrusted with the rebuilding. They struck my heart like thunder. I felt the weight of his promise and the seriousness of his call. Every generation faces a season when what can be shaken will be shaken, so that only what is eternal may remain. These moments are not signs of abandonment, but of preparation. God allows the shaking not to destroy, but to refine. He tests the foundation of hearts, families, churches, and nations to reveal what has been built on sand and what has been built on the rock. In the vision, I saw the earth trembling. Structures that once seemed unshakable were collapsing: systems, ideologies, institutions, and even the confidence of men. But in the midst of it all, there were people standing firm, their eyes lifted toward heaven. They were not shaken because their faith was anchored in something deeper than circumstance. These were the faithful ones, the ones who had learned to trust God when everything around them crumbled. Their strength was not found in wealth or influence or power, but in their unwavering devotion to the word of the Lord. The shaking, the Lord said, is not to punish, it is to purify. It removes the excess, the idols, the false securities we cling to. It exposes what is counterfeit so that what is true can stand. And those who endure through it, those who refuse to compromise, who continue to pray, who continue to love, who continue to serve, will be the ones God uses to rebuild what has been lost. They are not the loudest or the most visible, but they are the most faithful. When the dust settles, heaven will hand them the blueprints for the future. I saw in my spirit a remnant rising from the ruins. Their hands were scarred from the shaking, but their hearts were pure. They did not complain about what was destroyed. They began to build again, not with pride, but with humility, not with human ambition, but with divine instruction. They built altars before they built platforms. They sought presence before they sought progress. And because of their faithfulness, God entrusted them with influence that could not be corrupted, authority that could not be shaken, and wisdom that could not be bought. The Lord whispered in every shaking, I look for those who will not let go of my promises. Faithfulness in the storm is the key to favor in the rebuilding. When you stand firm in seasons of loss, heaven takes note. God watches how you respond when nothing makes sense. Do you give up when the foundation cracks, or do you keep building upon His word? Those who remain steadfast through the shaking will be trusted with greater things, not because they are the strongest, but because they are the most surrendered. I saw a generation being prepared in secret right now. They may seem hidden, overlooked, or forgotten, but they are being trained in the fire. When the shaking intensifies, their roots will hold. When others fall away, they will remain. And when the time comes to rebuild what the world has lost, hope, truth, righteousness, and peace, these will be the ones God raises up to lead. They will rebuild not according to human blueprints, but according to the heart of heaven. Their work will not glorify men, it will glorify God alone. Faithfulness is the currency of heaven. It is not measured in results, but in endurance. Can you stay true when no one applauds you? Can you obey when obedience costs you everything? Can you keep praying when the answer seems delayed? That is the faithfulness God rewards. The shaking will expose the difference between those who serve God for comfort and those who serve Him because they love Him. And when the storm is over, it will be the faithful who rise, not because they were untouched by the storm, but because they trusted the one who controls it. So if you are in a season of shaking, do not despair. Do not fear the trembling. It is not the end, but the beginning of something new. God is testing foundations because He intends to rebuild stronger, purer, holier than before. Stay faithful. Keep your eyes on Him. The shaking will not last forever, but the lessons learned in it will echo into eternity. When the world begins to rebuild, heaven will not entrust the future to those who compromised in fear, but to those who stood firm in faith. And when those faithful ones rise, the world will look at what God rebuilds through them, with beauty out of ashes, strength out of weakness, and glory out of brokenness, and they will be left speechless at what faithfulness can birth.